Hello and welcome to episode 196 of the Book Binge for a review of another Christopher Rocchio recommended book, Witchy Eye by DJ Butler, a book that Rocchio claims is super underread and I believe is true. This book is really cool, a lot of great stuff going on in this one, just up front gonna say that it's true. Like, the amount of ratings that this series as a whole has on Goodreads is abysmally low compared to what it should have, just based off of the quality of the concepts in here. If you've read the second edition, or if you have the second edition, read the little author's introduction or forward or whatever it is that's called in here. In fact, I'm actually going to look at what it's called because that'll probably, it's called the author's preface. Read the author's preface of Witchy Eye if you can, and tell me that that doesn't make you excited to read the book. The reason it makes you excited is because there's a lot of cool things that Butler is doing with Witchy Eye and the Witchy War series as a whole that are really, really cool. I know I'm redundant in saying that a few times, but it is definitely the truth. Somebody else who I know who read Witchy Eye compared it to Lord of the Rings in the sense that the way that J.R.R. Tolkien kind of re-envisioned the history of Europe and kind of utilized that for how he wrote Lord of the Rings and really Middle Earth as a whole. There's a lot of that kind of thing going on with Witchy Eye, except in America. This kind of thing is super awesome and really quite unique for something that you would put into the fantasy genre. With that, I've basically given the preamble for this video, all of the preamble that I need to anyway, and kind of tipped my hand on some of the things that I'm going to say in the video anyway. So let's just kind of jump into the good of Witchy Eye. The first thing is right along the lines of what I was just saying in the introduction. The setup, the world building, the alt history, this general type of thing. The way that Butler reimagines America as a setting for Witchy Eye is incredible. I believe it is set in the early 1800s America, but it is an alternate history type of America, so there's plenty of interesting, new, engaging ideas to go with here that aren't just what we know from American history. There's a lot of references to American history and historical figures, generally speaking, that are really cool and that will kind of get your brain rolling on okay, so how does this reference interact with, how can I think of this character from history versus how he's utilized in Witchy Eye or something along those lines. A lot of really cool stuff with the alternate history in Witchy Eye. Probably the main reason to want to read it. I was excited to read it enough as was. I was looking forward to trying it at some point in time. But like I said, that author's preface is so good. Just reading those few pages on basically where Witchy Eye came from, the sort of influences, the things that came together that made Dave want to write the series, or that eventually kind of adapted themselves into becoming the Witchy War series, is so cool. The alternate history stuff, the ideas from German history and some other random stuff, the idea of having kingdoms but also democracies and stuff kind of co-inhabiting the same area and combating with each other, and all this happening in an America was just him explaining the influences, the background of Witchy Eye made me so excited to read it. If it doesn't make you excited to read it, I almost have to wonder what's wrong with you, but it's probably just the fact that you're not an American. But the influences behind it aren't even just American in nature. It's just there's something to the DNA of Witchy Eye that is so entrancing and enthralling that even without reading it, it just sounds cool. That was enough for me to give it a shot. And I hope it's enough for you to give it a shot as well. But if you need some more things that are good about Witchy Eye other than just the concept of it, well, there are a few other things here as well. If you want good depictions of diverse and various cultures and peoples, this book has that in droves. Dave Butler is a very intelligent person, has a wide swath of knowledge about a lot of different stuff. In fact, I believe he's fluent in several languages. This really helps as well, very closely tied to the great portrayal of diverse cultures, and multiple of them, is the language and the prose of everything. The way that characters are written in this sense that makes everything super engaging. You meet characters from one area, like say the Appalachian peoples, or the Appalachie as they are called in this book. Well, they have their own way of speaking, they have their own way of behaving, they have their own cultural presence. But as the book goes on, you kind of move south into a more French based New Orleans, and the differences in certain cultural ideals, in the way that characters are written, in the way that characters speak, because Dave also writes dialect in this book and does so quite well as well. There's just a lot of intersecting of cultures and diversity of cultures, and just varying different ways of depicting people, and also areas where the culture kind of inhabits. That is just very, very cool. Like, I don't have the words to explain it nearly as eloquently as the book deserves, but it's very cool. It is just really, really cool to read this kind of stuff. Kind of along those same lines, the characters themselves are also really great. All the protagonists, like the main characters, basically the POV characters essentially, although not all of them, are interesting, very memorable. You're never going to really confuse one main character with another. Even some of the major side characters kind of fall in this as well. Even though I read this book over a long period of time, and I ended up doing so basically just on Mondays through the month of October, and basically the back half of September. That was the time that I spent reading Witchy Eye. It took me like a week in between reading sessions most of the time. Even despite that, and the fact that I was reading Wheel of Time on the other side the other days of the weekend, like Friday through Sunday, I never got confused with characters in this book, because they all have just their own identity. Is very strong. Butler does a very great job with that. Like I said, all the protagonists are very interesting and memorable in that way. You're not going to confuse them. You're going to be able to vary them, and they're all cool in their own interesting ways. Similar thing going on with the villains as well. All the villains are very mysterious and ominous in their own different ways, and some of the villains are POV characters. That was what I referenced when I said not all of them. That was in reference to the POVs. Some of the villains are POVs as well. Similar thing going on. They're very diverse in their depiction. There's one as well, one that is kind of like a quasi-villain, quasi-protagonist, like you're kind of in the little gray area in between. That's really great. That character, super sympathetically portrayed despite being kind of a piece of garbage at the beginning of book. Very cool stuff. Butler does a great job with character in Witchy Eye. I already talked about a very engaging setup. I would say there's a lot of great stuff. The first half of the book is definitely the stuff that I enjoyed the most. A lot of this has to do with the setup and starting the journey, this kind of stuff. I kind of borrows from certain tropes, or at least feels reminiscent of plenty of epic fantasy tropes without ever actually being those tropes in a lot of ways, at least as far as the journey beginning is concerned. Basically all the tropes that you can think of, like there's a little bit of like a hint of that, or a whisper of this, or maybe some plenty of influence from that taken here, but none of it feels like just a trope. And that's really refreshing in fantasy. So not only is the general concept of Witchy Eye super unique, you also have the fact that the setup of it and the general journey of it, that it's pretty unique as well. It's kind of its own thing. And I get this is probably a lot of why it hasn't really had such a huge market audience so far, because it's kind of just filling in a specific niche. Having an alternate history epic fantasy is not exactly the thing that people know to look for, but if this kind of thing sounds cool, Witchy Eye definitely does it very well. There's also something that I want to talk about in Witchy Eye that's great along the character front. There's a short story in the second edition as well. The second edition is what has the author's preface and a short story in the back. The short story is called Calvin Calhoun Sees the Lights of Atlanta. This expands upon Calvin's character specifically. That is really great. We'll talk about this a little bit more as well. There's just a lot of cool character stuff in Witchy Eye. Witchy Eye also has a lot of great action sequences. The back half is littered with them especially, so if you're an action forward reader, the first half might be a little bit of a struggle for you as it's kind of growing and building up, and some of that tension is rising until characters start to meet and you kind of have a whirlwind of events. Once that whirlwind of events happens, it's basically action through the end. You have several like mini climactic sequences that just kind of come back to back to back to back all the way through the end of the book. It's really satisfying in that way. Even though the action stuff wasn't my thing versus the setup, I really liked the first half. I still enjoyed the second half, but the first half was probably my preference, we'll say. If action is your thing, like for sure, the back half is probably going to satisfy you in a lot of cool regards. But not everything about the book is a slam dunk. I would say the most major complaint for me kind of has to do with the action sequences, insofar as there are moments when there are probably just a few too many conveniences. Not necessarily Deus Ex Machina moments, but definitely some moments that feel reminiscent of Deus Ex Machina. So not like Butler himself kind of just throwing something onto the page that's just like, oh yeah, I need my characters to get out of this situation, so we'll just get them out of it this way. It doesn't feel that cheap, but there are moments where characters, particularly Sarah, the main character, will do something or think of something to do that doesn't fully feel natural to me, and maybe it's just because I am so inferior in intelligence to Butler. Butler's a very smart guy. Maybe it's just because I'm not thinking along the same wavelength as him, but there are definitely moments where it's like, yeah, but like, how would that character actually think to do that? Or why would Sarah be already proficient enough with certain types of magic, we'll say, when she had no idea how to do any magic besides like basic hexing at the beginning of the book, and already by the end she's doing like crazy stuff that only like the prodigal son would be able to do. It feels a little bit cheap at times. Like I said, it's not entirely Deus Ex Machina in nature, but there are some moments where you really have to suspend your disbelief a bit, and there are some moments where like I just couldn't really suspend my disbelief. There's one moment in particular, and I'm not going to say the actual moment itself, but Sarah does have to regain something that is rightfully hers near the end of the book. Actually, I believe happens like right before the primary, like actual climactic sequence of the book, the actual climax. And the manner in which Sarah goes about obtaining this thing just doesn't really work for me. I really had to suspend my disbelief and just found I couldn't enough to really find it believable. It was something like, yeah, but she genuinely would never think to do that. I just don't really see that happening. It just felt like he had to make it happen, and it's a cool scene, don't get me wrong, really cool scene. I liked it, just the manner of getting there was like, well, I'm not sure how I felt about that part of it. Another minor problem that I personally had, just as a result of my preference being with the setup rather than the action, some of the action sequences feel paced a little bit strangely. I don't really have any way to justify this opinion, but the pacing of the action sequences, the fact that it's just back to back little moments, so you have like a little mini climax, mini climax, mini climax with just like 1 or 2 chapter arcs of action. Something about that in the back half of the book just feels off to me. Like I said, I don't really know how to define this. I don't know how to really explain why this is the case, but for whatever reason, I just happen to enjoy the first half a little bit more than I enjoyed the back half, when I feel like I should have enjoyed the back half a little bit more, if that makes any sense. Like I said, there's no like hard evidence to give you about why this is the case. Just something about the pacing of the back half felt off to me, but that could very well be because I only read it, you know, on Mondays basically. So I had like week-long gaps between my major reading sessions. That's probably a large part of why that sort of disconnect happened for me. Also, I will say a couple of the characters feel just slightly underdeveloped. Nothing too major that really brought down the story. I kind of referenced Calhoun, who has a short story at the end of the second edition that really rectifies the fact that his character feels underdeveloped in the main novel. But there are a couple of the like sort of they're not like main characters, but they're not side characters. They're kind of in that middle ground that feel slightly less developed than I would have liked for them to be, even if it's not like a crime how underdeveloped they were, if that makes any sense. As for the ugly, we will just say that a particular prospective romance kind of feels a little bit weird in this book. Again, this also doesn't really detract from the quality of the book itself, but it's a little bit too active a part of the characterization of one of the characters, especially in the first half of the book. That's really not fully my thing. It's also brought up perhaps a little bit too much throughout the first half of the book. It's something that is definitely going to feel weird to people and maybe just doesn't fully like work in the way that I think it was kind of intended. It just feels weird and kind of off. But like I said, it's still nothing necessarily too much to complain about. It's just something you kind of just have to deal with to read all the really cool parts of the book. It's nothing that takes a major, you know, front of story type of effect. It's definitely on the sidelines, even if it is brought up a little bit too much, but there is something there that some people might not take to at all, or might even be turned off by. But it definitely is not in there, at least not in this book, enough for it to be a problem. So take that as you will. For the recommendation, I'm pretty sure you could get, especially at early on in the video, how I feel about this, to the degree that I definitely recommend Witchy Eye. Despite its weak points, despite some of the stuff that I maybe didn't love as much as I wanted to, or that had a slight detracting factor to them that kind of turned me off in one way or another, the concept of Witchy Eye is just too good, it is too fun, too good of an idea to pass up or to ignore. If you have any interest in alternate history and the like, if you want a notably different spin on something in the epic fantasy genre or fantasy in general, if you want a fantasy literally set in America, if you happen to be a blood red American like me, this book is for you. I definitely recommend giving it a shot. Besides, kind of as I hinted at a little bit earlier, it kind of sucks that something so unique and just passionately delivered and interesting is so underread. Something like this should definitely have a little bit more of an audience, even if it's exactly something like this that maybe isn't going to attract much of an audience for a little while. But there are 4 books out in the Witchy War series. It's going to be 6, kind of built up into 2 like trilogy like arcs. For the series to have 4 books in it already and 2 more to come, and to be with as little ratings on Goodreads as it has, feels criminal. So if there's any part of you that is even just a little bit interested in checking out Witchy Eye, please check it out. It's cool and you'll probably find it worth it. And basically everybody who I've talked to who has read on in the series says it gets better. So yeah, the book is already pretty cool. I'm excited to continue at some point in time. I'm not sure exactly when, but yeah, it's one that I really look forward to being able to read more of at some point in time, hopefully soon. But speaking of soon and Witchy Eye, I will hopefully on Thursday. It might not be this Thursday at the time this video comes out. If it's not this Thursday, it'll definitely be in December, but sometime pretty soon I'm going to be having a discussion on Witchy Eye with Dave himself. I hope you are willing to check out that video. I hope you're willing to check out the book and read it so that you can watch that video. Obviously, if it's coming out 2 days from now, you won't have time to pick it up and read it before the video comes out. But if you're somebody who's already read it and is interested in that kind of thing, Dave is a very nice guy. He's really cool. Or if the video happens to come out next month and you have like a couple weeks to read it or something like that, I recommend you do so. The book deserves it. Dave deserves it. It's great. I hope you check it out. And that's my review of Witchy Eye. Like I said, yeah, so that's basically how I feel about that. That's the end of this review. I'll be back hopefully on Thursday with that discussion with Dave. It might not be like I said, but I'm thinking that's what it will be. But whether it is or not, that is when I'll be back, is Thursday, and I hope to see you guys there.